Welcome back to the boathouse. This week, while George finishes up the drawers from the last episode, Steve gets started on the aft bulkhead that encloses the head, which will lead us to a project that some of you have noticed going on in the background. But first, an update that we know you've all been waiting for a while now.
We promised an update. Here it is.
So, as you can see, I'm back from France. The trip to go visit my dad was really long. There was a lot to do, but I'm glad to report that he is doing well. He's doing much better. I've been back for a little bit now, but we haven't updated you guys, so we figured we'd give you a little update. So first things first, we've been working on this project for like 5 years, and things change, things evolve, and so we're rolling with the punches. And the big thing is Kira and I bought a house just down the road, which facilitates a lot of things. So one of the big ones is that I'm going to actually go back to France and go get my dad and bring him over here so that he can live with us and have a nice, caring, and comfortable place to be, which is going to be really wonderful, and it'll be nice to have him around. The other thing is that I now have a space to set up my own workshop, which a lot of you have noticed that I've really loved getting my hands on the woodworking and doing that kind of stuff, and so it just makes sense to kind of evolve in that direction, especially since I just got back and look at all this amazing stuff that's going on in here. Like, it's just so cool to see the inside of the boat getting put together, and since that's going to be Steve's space, it makes sense for him to work on that and kind of figure that out, and having two people inside the boat working at the same time just is a little complicated, so it's gonna work really well for me to set up my shop at home and be able to take like little side projects and maybe build the hatches or cleats or things like that, and still be a part of the channel, but be able to kind of go in my own direction as well, which will get me set up for, at some point, getting my own boat. I don't know about building my own boat, but at least working on my own boat. So that is the direction that we're going. So I just really want to say thank you to everybody that's been asking and has been curious about where I've been, and sorry to keep you all in the dark. But we really, really appreciate all the help and the support, and especially just all the support that we've been getting for the channel. We're just really, really excited as to where this is going.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to see your shop set up, and I know that having your own shop and your own space and your own tools has been something that you've been jonesing for a real long time.
Yeah, so that'll be really nice.
I'm really psyched that you're getting it. George arrived this morning at 8 a.m. with bells on. Gotta love it. Love it when someone knows exactly what they need to do. Anyways, he's outside. He's working on sanding all the drawers that I made. So we're getting ready for the finish on those. And while George is working on that, I've been working on mocking up the head here. I'm trying to figure out what this space looks like and how that affects the rest of the layout into the boat. And I think I've got it marked out where I want it. Basically, this would be the head, and obviously we got to put a floor in, and I think the head would sit about here, and I think we'd probably have it a little closer to where the wall is, and probably down, not quite as high as it is. We could also build the sole of the floor up a little bit higher, so we've got some playroom there. But what I'm really trying to figure out is where this aft bulkhead wants to land so that we can pattern it out. Once that bulkhead is patterned out, we can really play with the sole and the head and get its exact location. But we have to play with the head enough to be able to figure out where that wants to land. So I think this is a pretty decent distance to be able to open the door, open the lid on the head, and sit there and have, see if I can do this without knocking everything over, have enough room for your knees, so even someone a bit taller than me would be okay. And we want to be able to have a shower in here as well. And I put shower in quotes because it's not going to be hot water on demand shower like you have in a house. But we do want a place that you can get wet. Also a great place to store like fowlies when you're offshore and the weather's poor. But it would be really nice to come back from, say, mountain biking or rock climbing for the day and to be at an anchorage or a mooring or a dock where you can't just shower on the deck, and to be able to come down in here and have a small portable pressurized shower, which Robin actually has one. We used it when we were up in Acadia, and it was pretty sweet. So it's just a bag, you fill it with warm water or you hang it in the sun, let it get hot. It's got a little foot pump that pressurizes it, and it's got a little nozzle, and you can take a rinse-off shower. So we want to be able to get into the head here and to be able to have a rinse-off shower and clean up a little bit, and to do that relatively comfortably. So I think this is pretty good. So we can get the bulkhead mocked up, and once that's in here, we can play with it a little bit more. And then there's a lot of room back here, which will just end up becoming lockers and storage. And that'll be a great place to, say, put the first aid kit or spare parts, things that you need accessible, but things that you don't need to get to every day. And it won't be a big trial and tribulation to just go into the head and go grab it. So I'm gonna go grab some cardboard and some other accoutrements and get this bulkhead mocked up, just like we mocked up this one and the one forward and the one forward of that, and same process. So here's our pattern, and might have gone a little nuts, but we had a whole bunch of cardboard on hand, so I just took the glue gun and filled up the void. First off, I just clamped in this piece of cedar here with some spring clamps where I wanted it, and put one down to the build stringer to kind of register it, and then just started adding cardboard, filling in around the house sides here and where the clamp and the shelf are. And I've got my vertical line from the level so that when we put this on the panel, we can align that with the grain on the panel and make sure that, you know, the glue lines aren't leaning at some hideous angle. And this side's a little rough, but I know that I need to extend it 15 inches from the vertical. So we'll mark that when we bring it in, and we can trim the top of this later. We'll just leave it a little tall for now. So I got to slide this out of here and do a little bit of trimming on the edge of it, and then we'll be able to wrestle out one of the sheets of plywood that we made earlier that are in the house, put this on it, cut it out, and go from there and get it fit. Windy. We'll go get some sawhorses and George, and we'll wrestle that panel out. Grab one of those sawhorses and bring it to the front of the house. I gotta go grab the jigsaw and stuff. I'll be right there. I realize I might as well just leave that long for now. I can cut it when it's in the boat. Don't cut it till you have to cut it. bulkhead. It'd be a little lighter. I think that'll do. Trim that top off, but otherwise, I'm happy. Now we get to power planning. Getting cleaned up.
While George got the drawers coated with sealant, Steve moved on to finishing up the small bulkhead just aft of the settee berth, which meant it was time for the wood stove to go back in the boat.
No, I'm gonna overwinter somewhere and just spend the entire winter hanging out by the wood stove, making musical instruments and going backcountry skiing. So before we can finalize this bulkhead, trying to get the wood stove figured out a bit. And a few considerations are we want to make sure that we can have the stove lit and have someone comfortably sitting or sleeping on this bunk, and that they're not going to inadvertently end up setting themselves on fire. We want to make sure that we can move past the wood stove safely. We don't need to worry about when the boat is in a storm and it's a gale and we're blowing all over the place, because the stove won't be lit then. But, you know, it could be a mildly rolly anchorage or kind of a wet day close to cruising that we might want to light the wood stove, and there'll be a little bit of motion, so we want to make sure that you're not going to get bumped up against it. And with that in mind, the doors of the wood stove should face fore and aft, so that when the boat's on a heel, there's no chance of those doors, or less chance of those doors wanting to swing open and spew the hot ashes everywhere. And speaking of hot ashes, we also need to make sure that anything that does happen to fall out of the wood stove is safe. So what we're going to want to do is some stainless steel work around the stove so that, heavens forbid, the door should pop open and some ashes should spill out. They'll be contained and they're not going to roll down to the bilge and set everything on fire. And we also want to make sure that we can get the longest run of stovepipe possible. It's one of the issues with wood stoves and boats is if you have a run that kind of wanders all over the place and is not very long, the heat differential between the stove and the top isn't all of that dramatic, so you don't get a good draft. A tall, straight chimney is the best for that. So this actually sets us up pretty well because we can come straight up for a ways and a little elbow around the house, and we can go out the house top, which will give us a halfway decent run without much of a bend in it. So this seems pretty good. I think we could, in theory, move the stove maybe a little closer or a little farther, and I might play with that a little more. And then I got to do some serious thinking about how best to frame in below it. The stove, it's not crazy heavy. It's not like a 500-pound cast iron stove or anything. I mean, obviously, I carried it down here, and I'm not a particularly large individual. But we do want to make sure that it's anchored really well. So the feet have holes where we can screw them down, and these rings are actually to put a turnbuckle down so you can really lock it down. And we might want to put some sort of upright here so that as you're going forward or aft, you have something to hang on to by the wood stove. Maybe a low bulkhead here, so if you were to bump up against it, it would keep you off a little bit. But these are the things that we're kind of trying to figure out and play with and get this situated. But, you know, like everything else in the boat, it's all a compromise, and it's like a big web where you pull on one little corner and it trickles out across the whole thing. So.
In the background of some of the recent episodes, some of you noticed a large glue up on the upstairs workbench. Now that Steve is really tugging on that spider web he talked about, it's finally time to bring that out.
Alright, it's time to deal with this monstrosity.
It looks like the day just changed a little bit.
They just changed a little bit. They have a habit of doing that. There's the plan, and there's what happens. We got the stove in there, the wood stove, and then after the wood stove goes the galley stove, and after the galley stove goes the galley. We realize that we just got to kind of see things more mocked up to kind of decide exactly what we want to do and how we want to do it, which means we need to jump into the galley a little bit, which leads us to this. Did you ever do a glue up with this many pieces?
Not with this many pieces.
No, me either.
Bigger, maybe.
Yeah, more surface area. Definitely longer, but not this many pieces.
Yeah, it's be fun.
So we're going to use the 2-to-1, which is the same epoxy we used to glue up the bulkheads, and we're going to do a little different than the bulkheads. We're going to put on a thin coat and then a thickened coat, and instead of the silica, we're going to use the sawdust. So that was from the bandsaw. So what's the importance of the wet out in this application?
So doing the thin stuff first is just going to make sure that we get really good adhesion between all of the surfaces to make sure that we don't leach the epoxy into any of the blocks when it goes on, since the blocks are a little dry. So it's really just gonna make us confident in our glue up.
Yeah.
More than anything. The epoxy already is filling space, and then the thickened stuff will make sure any cracks that we have are filled, but we know we're gonna get a nice solid glue up this way.
Yeah, and we didn't worry so much about that with the panels because it's flat grain to flat grain and there's such huge surface areas.
Yeah.
And we thickened it with the silica, which is really tough on tools. And like you mentioned earlier, that when we're working on the galley counter here in the future and we're cutting away, that silica is really going to dull up the knives. So thickening with the sawdust. But that sawdust is definitely going to like suck up more of that epoxy than the silica would.
Yeah, and there's some shakes and stuff in the blocks just to make sure that the wood doesn't absorb more than we want it to. So I think we're set. I think we have a really good setup. Did a lot of thinking.
Yeah, as you can tell by the myriad of numbers and all the layout.
Yes.
Cool. Well, I think...
Time to get dirty.
Yeah, let's start mixing this up. I will stay clean for a few minutes. We can get maybe the thin stuff mixed. And then I'll get the camera set up here, probably just on time lapse so we can go. Because once we start this,
we gotta go.
We're not going to be able to be messing with cameras and getting glue on mics and all sorts of stuff.
Yep. Have fun.
Gloves?
Gloves. I think we'll be good. Just gotta beat the heat. Gotta beat the time.
Well, folks, there's the plan, and then there's what happens. The plan was to do this in one big glue up. But what happened was the epoxy started to kick, and we did not have enough time to lay everything out. So we got this chunk done, we got into the end of this row here, and the epoxy really started to thicken and cure. So if we had continued to go, all of this earlier stuff would have hardened without being clamped, and that would have been no good. We'll let this set, and then we'll just have to add on some more layers to it, which isn't a big deal. And I think that we should probably plan on doing 2 more layers, so this will end up getting glued up in 3 separate installments. If the epoxy had a lot longer working time, we probably could have done the whole thing, but we needed like an hour and a half of open time, and we've got 45 minutes. So, but not a big deal. There is plenty to work on. We don't need this for a while. So when Carolyn gets back in a couple days, we can add on the next 2 layers and then get to work flattening and cleaning this up. I can't wait to see what it looks like. Well, we're about to find out.
It's for so long. You grab me that white scrapie. All better?
Yeah, even farther towards me. I'm having a hard time reaching in and
Sure.
placing it. Oh, that's much better. Thank you.
More better.
Much more better.
Love seeing progress.
It's like we learned or something.
What? No.
It's got more efficient.
Old dogs, new tricks. Oh, absolutely.
And this is plenty of thickness that
We can flatten
we
it
can
out.
flatten it out. Not a problem.
Sweet deal. Good morning.
Good morning. Ha! 1 more row.
All right,
We'll do that tomorrow. That'll be real easy.
Cool.
The rest of those seem to want to stay for now.
That's getting real.
It's getting real.
Next time from the boathouse, we'll see Steve work through a mock-up of the galley, and he'll get the countertop finished with a look at the sink that will get installed. But that episode won't air for 2 weeks, because next Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, Steve and Ann will be live from the United States Sailboat Show in Annapolis, Maryland. Make sure you have your notifications on, because there will be a more detailed announcement coming soon. And besides the live show, Steve and Ann will do a few smaller live appearances throughout next weekend. As always, thanks for joining us, and thanks for all the support you give the channel, and we'll see you next Friday.